Hello everyone, welcome back. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how we can create something very similar to this head sculpt here, and we're going to use a mixture of softwares. We're going to use Zbrush, Autodesk Maya, 3DCoat to texture this, back into Maya to render it, and then we're also going to use Photoshop to add some final touches. So it's going to be quite a long tutorial, so sit back, relax and watch this tutorial. I'll also include the resources in this video so you can follow along to it, and yeah, let's begin. As you can see, I've already got Vigo Mortensen as my reference, and I've used PureRef to collect all of this reference. So I've just dragged and dropped that on, and I've got all of this from Google. So I'm looking at multiple head sculpts, or head view should I say, and I'm looking at the side view, 3/4 view. I've got some black and white images, and I've also got some different ages here and also some different hairstyles, and he's got a beard in this one. So just to give me an idea as to how I could sculpt into this head sculpt. So I am using a stock head sculpt, which again I will include in this video. And let me just go all the way back to the beginning. So let's just init Zbrush, and that's just going to remove everything. So let's go back up to the top. Let's go to import and import my base mesh. So just left click and drag. You can also hold shift on the keyboard for it to snap to the center. Make sure you don't press anything else. If you do that, then it's going to do this, and that's just a mess. So I'm going to have to go to preference, init Zbrush again, and then go to import and import my base mesh. So just drag it out, hold shift for it to snap to the center, and then press edit. Okay, that's going to make it an editable mesh. If you do end up dragging another one out before you press edit, just go up to layer and clear, and then that will clear it. Okay, so let's change the material. I'm going to change it to a different matte cap material. I might change it to this metal material. That looks okay. And as you can see, it's currently low poly. So ideally you want to sculpt on a low poly model instead, because that way you're not focusing on all of the tiny little details. You're just trying to get the overall shape of the face the same as your model. I'm also going to load up my personal UI. So I'm going to load my UI here. Let's have a look. Zbrush, that one. There we go. And now I've got all of my custom brushes at the bottom of the panel. I'm going to activate the activate symmetry. You can hold control and left click and drag on this side panel here, and that way we can get from the brushes to our settings. Okay, so where shall we start? We could start with using the move tool, and we can just move this around. So here I'm just going to move the chin up slightly, and he's got a pronounced jaw, so I'm just going to bring this out. And take your time with this. I'm going to do this quite quickly, but you can see exactly how we're going to change this. We're mostly just going to use the move tool and then some of the standard brushes. Okay, so let's move that. We can see the temple comes in slightly, so let's push this in. And with it being low poly, it means that we can move a lot of this geometry around. If I go to the line fill polyfill here, then we can see this effect. We can also go down to the UV map and then morph UV, and then we can see the UV that's on this model. So this was UV'd in Maya with the 3DCoat and so, and we're going to use that for our model. Okay, so back to move tool, and let's try and squish these ears in a little bit. I don't think they're as pronounced. And you can hold shift and smooth if you need to smooth the geometry. Okay, so that's just made them a little bit smaller. Now I can just push these in. Now I would say the eyebrows are kind of dead on actually. They do kind of come over the eyelids, so that's fine. I don't think I need to move too much there. So I'm just making some small changes. I would say the main thing that needs to be changed in this case are the cheekbones. And I'll have to draw these on, and also the lips. They come out just a little bit more. They're a little bit thinner. You've also got your history here, so you can scroll back if you feel like you need to change it. And I also want a standard pose here, or expression. I don't want to add a smile to this. There we go. Okay, so then go to a side view and get some of your other references. So let's have a look at this side view. It looks very different here. I think it's because the eyebrows are very faint, but it almost looks like a totally different person. Let's just look at the nose. Have I got a better reference? This one as a side view. Let's have a look at this. Okay, so we can see those cheekbones are just a little bit higher, so let's just push these up. The lips don't come out as much either, so let's just push those back in. Let's push that back. That looks a bit better. Okay, back to that side view. Looks like the nose goes in just a little bit. Let's just move this back in. Right, so make those adjustments. Of course, you can make your own head sculpt, make it from scratch in Maya. In this case, I'm just using this standard head sculpt, and I'm just slowly pushing and pulling the geometry just to try and get it the same shape as our reference. Okay, so let's turn off the polyframe. Let's go up to geometry and then divide this just so we can see a little bit more detail. And now we can see what kind of detail we could add to this sculpt. So we can see here that I might need to go into this standard brush. I'm going to turn the intensity down and then just slowly start to sculpt into this. Okay, a bit around here by the cheekbone. So just left click to add onto the geometry, or hold Control to create a mask, and then it will create a mask around it. In this case, I definitely don't want to do that. Or hold Alt just to sculpt into our sculpt. Okay, so let's sculpt this in a little bit more by the temple. So I'm doing a mixture of sculpting outwards and then sculpting inwards there. And I can smooth that out with Shift. Okay, let's just use the Move tool. I can see the eyebrows need to kind of come up a little bit. Okay, so I will leave it there. I don't think I'm going to add any more details, but of course you can definitely add more. We're going to move on to the texturing of this head sculpt. I'm going to import this into 3DCoat. So we're going to go up here to export, and then let's export this OBJ. Okay, now I've got this set to subdivide 2, so I'm going to name this sub2, and that's the base, and then I'm going to save that. I'm then going to select the lower res and then export that as well. So export sub1 in this case. Then go to, in fact, I'm going to undo that, just go back to my, in fact, no. We'll go back to our lower res version. Okay, and then I'm going to save this file, save as, and yeah, we'll save that. If it disappears, it's still there, just hold right click and it will still be there. Okay, so let's jump into 3DCoat where we're going to texture this. Okay, so now that we're in 3DCoat, we're going to import our head sculpt. I'm going to import the Subdivide 2 version. So we're going to go on to Paint UV Mapped Mesh per pixel, select the folder, and then load our Sub2 base head. We're going to change the software preset to Maya. I'm not going to subdivide it. I'm going to keep the UV. Please make sure you keep UV, don't auto map. We need to use that UV that's within Maya. No smoothing, and we can set this to 2K or 4K. 4K is pretty good for this, so let's click OK. And there is our sculpt. If you press W, we can see the mesh. And I'm also going to set this to orthographic. Right, if I import this into Maya, let's just have a look at this UV. Notice that in Maya, the UV is the correct way up, and then in Zbrush, it was flipped. So when we go back into Zbrush, we're going to need to flip this back to its normal position. And before we import it into 3DCoat, if you wanted to do any other changes, then we can select our mesh, go to Sculpting, and then we can use any of these tools. So here, I can start to, where are we? There we go. If I double click on this, I can then increase the brush size. Make that quite a lot smaller. Let's do 1. We can see this is starting to sculpt directly on top of it. If you hold Alt or Control, sorry, then it will sculpt inwards. Here we can smooth. This one is our smooth surface to mesh without changing the original shape, which is quite cool. So it's going to smooth it without actually changing it. And then we've got things like a single vertex pull. So it'll only pull a very small area. And things like sharpen edges. And also level surface. So there's quite a lot of tools here to utilize. And you can do this all within Maya. So you can continue sculpting within Maya. I found that within Zbrush, it's a fantastic tool to get your base mesh. But if you just need to make a very tiny adjustment, you might even need to go into the edges and change something. Then it's best to do this back in Maya. So I can double click here. Let's say, for example, I wanted to move this out. Then I could do that. Or if I select my vertexes and then press B on the keyboard, so I've got a soft selection, then I can make very small changes. Okay, so it's very precise. So if you do need to make any very small precise changes, I'd recommend that you do this in Maya with these tools. Now, if it won't let you actually sculpt onto this, and it says it's a non-manifold mesh, then you might need to go to Mesh and Cleanup. Now let's just select the settings here. And you'll need to select the normals and geometry, and also make sure that the faces with holes is selected. And what else? Let's have a look. Non-manifold geometry. Make sure that's ticked. Apply it, do the cleanup, and then you'll be able to sculpt on top. Okay, so that is the sculpting within Maya. Let's go back to 3DCoat, and we're going to load some textures. So I've got some textures here within my folder, and I'm going to use this old gentleman here. So let's have a look at the front of this face. And I'm going to use this as my texture. So I've got multiple views of this head sculpt. I keep saying head sculpt. It's an actual human being, but a side view of this head. Okay. And I can use these as our textures. So I'm going to create a new texture. I've gone down to default. I'm going to select new. I'm going to select my color texture. And then, oh, we can see an earlier version. I've done a zombie version. Let's go back to my folder, head sculpt. Then let's select a front view of this guy. Okay, so we'll let that load. We'll keep everything by default and then click save. And I want to turn off the metalness and the depth as well. So you can see with the smart material preview, I can put that on top and it's going to try and tile it over the entire model. So we need to change this to from camera. And then we can move this in place. And then I can zoom this in. Now I can see it's imported it in skewed. So make sure you press reset. And now we can scale this down. And then move this in place. So it's not going to be a perfect match with your head sculpt. You might get lucky and it is a perfect match, which is great. In this case, it isn't. So I'm going to do quite a lot of alterations here. So let's just move this, at least get the eye in the right place. Let's zoom this in. Okay, and then I can just start painting. Make sure you press E and ignore back faces, and then press the first brush and then start painting. So I've got a soft brush selected. I can start painting into this. If you like, you can just paint the entire object, so you could use the photo bucket tool and then just paint the entire thing. So at least we've got something to work with. Now if I remove this image, it looks pretty terrifying, but we can see this side is looking pretty good. Top of the head isn't too bad. It stretched it and put the face at the back, which is terrifying, but again we can change that later. So I'm going to move this over to this side, and then let's try and get this eye in place. And then let's paint it in manually. You can also change the layer opacity to something like 5, so we can't see as much. And then just use the smart material preview as our preview to see what that's going to look like. Okay, so I'm just going to paint this in. That looks better. Now let's see where our nose is. Let's try and get this in place. And I'd recommend that you try and find a an image pack that has the same head in multiple views. If you use, let's say, an actor and you're collecting 6 images of different views, then you're going to have different lighting scenarios, and it's going to look like a mismatch of images. So even use yourself as a reference if you need to. So here I'm going to just try and get this in place. We can see it's stretched the eyes, but it doesn't matter. We're just focusing on the nose right now. And I'm going to do this relatively quickly, but definitely take your time with this. and use the images that are within this folder, or you can try and collect your own. So let's focus on the mouth now. I don't think this is going to be a good mouth for this. I'm just going to roughly paint it in anyway, and then we can change it later. So I'm just going to change those eyebrows, make these a little bit smaller. I think that looks a little bit better. You can see that's pushed the eye way up, which isn't good, so we're going to need to move that back down. Let's paint that in. Again, that's not good. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so that will do for the front view. Now we need to try and clean up the side view. You can either create a new material, or I'm just going to right click here and go to the Smart Material Editor, go back to this image, and then let's select a side view. So I'll select this one, and then click Save. And then same process, select from camera. Let's line this up. Might need to just rotate this and scale this down. And then I'll scale this down for the ears and paint them in. The ears are quite long here, so I'm going to need to skew this and move this into place. Doesn't look too bad. And then let's paint this one in. Just paint that horrifying face out the back of his head. And let's just see what this would look like here. That's not too bad. So I'm going to paint this grey section out. Okay, and for the other side of the face, we can just select back to 30% so we can see this, and then just select flip along the x-axis, and then all we've got to do is just move this and skew this in place. I might just reset this and scale this down, and then flip it again. There we go. Scale down, rotate. Just try and get this to match our head sculpt. That's okay. Back to 5% and then let's paint this in. Now I'm using 3DCoat here, but you don't need to use 3DCoat. You can use something like Substance Painter or Mari or whatever you are using to paint into this. In fact, in the film industry, they use Mari because you can render this out with really high detail textures. It's great for films where you're rendering a character. So if you need a lot of detail, you would use Mari. Okay, I think we might need to select a different image here. Let's just try and blend that out in the back. In case you're starting to Google Mari, you'll then see the price and then you'll say, maybe I'll stick with 3DCoat and Substance Painter. It is very expensive, but it's fantastic for high poly meshes and high detailed textures. Now, did I just remove the ear? No, it's still there, but we can see there's a little bit of ghosting going on underneath the ear, so I'll just remove that. The lighting's a little bit inconsistent, it gets a little dark at areas, so I'm just going to try and paint that out. We can always export this out, export the texture on the UV back into Photoshop and then paint into this a little bit more, add a few more details. I'm just going to go back into my Smart Material editor and let's just select a different view. I don't want to see his tongue. Let's just try this one. It's the front view, but it's he's kind of looking down a little bit more, so let's have a look at this one. So from camera, reset. Yeah, okay. I'll just paint this chin on here. And then I'm going to select a different image for my lips. His lips are totally different to my head sculpt, so I've got an image of lips here. Then let's save this one again from camera. And let's move this in place. Oh, that looks horrifying. Turned into the Joker. Let's just reset this. Well, that's terrifying, isn't it? Okay, even when I reset it, it's skewing, so let's just move this into place instead. Let's scale this down. That looks a bit more like it. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in here and just lightly paint this on. Yeah, that's a load better. It's looking a little bit dark here. I could continue to work into this. I could go back into my reference and start to paint this out. For now, I'm just going to keep this the way it is, just so we can see what this looks like in Maya. I'm going to go into my Smart Material. I am just going to go back into that front view and just remove this black area here. So I'll save that. By all means, create new material, so I'm just replacing the one that's already there. So let's just scale this way down. Maybe stretch it out. Yeah, we could do something like that. And then just paint this in. Okay, that'll do for now. You can always add more details as well. If you wanted to add face paint, you could get another image and you could paint into it, or you could use these brushes. You could use these stencils as well, and you could paint something else into it. Oh, I don't want to bake my curvature. No, 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 no. It's going to do it anyway, but you can then select other materials and paint into this if you so wish. For now, I'm just going to export the base layer. I don't want to have any curvature maps. I may need to press cancel. So we're then going to export this one layer out. We're not going to export the head sculpt. We're just going to export this layer. So we're going to go to textures, export, and export color and albedo map. Okay, and I'll put this in my head sculpt folder. I'll do a new one called textures. Head, sculpt, base, texture, and I'm going to export that out as a targa, TGA, and press save. And then let's just see that in the folder. Back to textures. So you can open your targa files in Photoshop and we can see what that looks like. It should be on our unwrapped UV. As horrifying as it is, that's what it looks like when it's unwrapped. So small areas here, if you needed to make any adjustments, you can go into something like the spot healing brush tool and then just remove this. And again, if you need to make any fine adjustments, let's say you wanted to add some scars here or add some sort of paint effect, maybe you went into here and let's try and find something we could add. Have I got any stamps? Scar, let's have a look at that. Yeah, if you wanted to paint into this, then you could do that. And then just save it as a targa again, and then it will be applied to our image. For now, I'm just going to remove that, just so we can see our targa file. So I'll close this down. And now we need to make our displacement map. So our displacement map is going to give us all of those details. I'll just go back to my previous version. And then zoom in here. We can see all of the pores and the details on the face. And we need to create a displacement map within 3DCoat to add these details. We can then import that into Maya and then start to render it. Okay, so now we're going to save this out. So make sure you file and save what you've painted. So let's go and save this in my head sculpt folder. So head sculpt underscore paint. Then I'll delete this layer. So we're back to our base layer. And now we need to add a different texture. So in this case, if I go back to my head sculpt folder, we need to add a displacement map. Now I've already got one here that's laid out in a TIFF. And this is what we're going to paint in. So we can see all of the little details and the crevices in the face. That's what we're going to paint in 3DCoat. So same process. I'm just going to go back to that head sculpt, or the head texture, sorry. Select on the texture, and then let's go into my XYZ face, and then import this displacement map. Okay, so once that's loaded, I've got this loaded into a new material. We're going to select from camera, and it's the exact same technique. So let's just add this to 40% so we can see it. We can select reset. And then we need to do this all over again, but with the displacement map. Okay, so we need to move this into place. I'm going to select my soft brush again. Okay, and then we can start painting this in. So I'm going to select this back to 5%. And in fact, I'm going to create a new layer since we deleted the other one. Okay, just start to paint that in. If you want, you can go back to that paint bucket tool and then tap on the entire image just so we can get something on our model. And as you can see at 4K, it's quite slow, so make sure you set this according to how fast your machine is. This laptop isn't too bad, but at 4K it will start to slow down, so you can export this at 2K instead, and it'll be much faster and a lot more reliable. Okay, so we can see here it's lined up for the eyes. It's not too bad there. Let's just move this one back into place. Okay, let's, oh no, I just selected the paint bucket again. Let's select our brush and paint this in instead. So here I'm just zooming in for the nose, trying to get that in place, and then I can paint that in. So I'm just moving this. Ooh, that looks strange, doesn't it? Just moving this into place for the chin. Let's move up to the cheekbones. So now I'm just dragging this across. It's basically the face with a front and two side views stitched together. And that way we can add all of our details, front and sides. We haven't got one for the back of the head, so we're going to need to improvise there. Okay, so for the top of the head, I'm just going to zoom this in. And just use this section. You shouldn't see that black mark that it's making. I'm pretty sure that's a glitch. I've never actually seen that before. But, you know, it always glitches when you're doing a demonstration. It just knows that you're doing something, and it says, yeah, nah, I won't work properly today. Okay, so paint that in. We've also got the back of the head there. Let's just remove that. Just going to copy this texture all the way down, I think. In this case, we're not actually going to see the back of the head, and especially if you started to add hair, you're not going to see this. I'm just going to paint it out anyway. Okay, so to demonstrate this, I think I'm going to leave it there. It looks okay. Again, you're going to want to spend some time on this. I've just blitzed through this. But yeah, take your time. Right, so I'm going to export this one now. So textures, export, color, albedo map. And I'm going to set this to, let's export this, textures, head sculpt. And I'll set this to dis for displacement. Okay, and then save as this. Don't save because we're going to save over the colored version. So I'm going to save this as paint underscore dis and save that. Right, so now I can close this down. Okay, so before we get into Maya, I want to show you how we can import this sculpt into Zbrush and add the displacement map within Zbrush. So let's go to import, and I'm going to import my subdivided 2 version. Okay, sub 2. Left click drag, hold shift to center it, then press edit. And again, I'm going to change that matte cap material. Okay, so let's add our alpha. So you go up here to alpha, select import, and then import the displacement map. Now I noticed that I actually exported them as targets, and the targets aren't supported within Zbrush. So I've had to put these into Photoshop and then just export them out as TIFFs. Okay, so just import them in, file, save as, and export as a TIFF. Okay, so now we need to import our alpha, import the displacement TIFF, and we can see that the alpha is the right way up, but if we go to our UV map and morph UV, we can see that it's upside down. We could change it through the UV. I'm just going to change it back to its normal position. Instead, I'm going to flip the alpha. So the alpha is the right way up. Let's flip V, and now it's going to be upside down. Brilliant. Okay, so next thing to do is to go to our texture map and then select new texture. So it's going to create a new texture onto our model. Now, if I press displacement map and create displacement map, it's going to say switch to low subdivision level and try again. Okay, so we need to go back up to geometry and then we need to reconstruct our subdivision. Let's go down to displacement map, and then let's create displacement map. Okay, and then increase intensity. We'll then need to go back up to geometry and then create a higher res version. So we've got subdivide 2, we can subdivide 3. Now at this stage, if it's not working properly, or if it's still saying that you need to delete the lower, then just make sure you at least delete the lower and then reconstruct subdivision. Make sure it is the lowest version, and then select the displacement map. Now I've just noticed that this isn't the right displacement map, so we need to go back down to displacement map, select this here, and then select our map. There we go. So this is the alpha that we loaded. We can see that there's an awful lot of detail there, so we're going to need to turn down the intensity a little bit. We can add the smooth UV. In this case it's not doing too much, but we just need to decrease the intensity. That's looking quite good. So now we can see the displacement map on our model, right? So if we wanted to add any more detail, then we could go back into our brushes and then just start sculpting into this mesh and adding more details around the eyes, around the nose. For now I'm just going to keep it the way it is, but here we can see this is how we import our displacement map into Zbrush, and then again we can start sculpting into this in even more detail. Okay, awesome. So that's Zbrush. Let's move on to Maya and import all of this and do a nice render of it. Right, so now that we're back in Maya, we're going to go to File and Import, and we'll import our subdivided 2 version. You can also go to Zbrush and you can export a higher poly version. So you could export the subdivided 3 version. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's export, and I believe I've already done it. Yes, I've already exported a subdivided 3 version, but you can go ahead and subdivide again and then export that version. So let's go into our head sculpt and let's test out the subdivide 3 base. Okay, so there's a lot more polys here to work with. And to be honest, you don't really need the subdivided 3 version. You're going to get some really nice results with the subdivide 2, but let's just test this with the sub 3. So we need to create a new material, and I'm going to render all of this within Arnold. Before we render this out, I'm going to go to HDRI Haven, HDRI, there's our Vigo Mortensen, HDRI Haven, and let's download a HDRI that we can have in our background. So HDRIs, and let's just download anything here. This looks quite cool, so let's export this out. Let's do the 2K version, just so it's not too user intensive, and let's save that out. Okay, great. Now let's create our material. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Arnold, Lights, and Skydome Light. And that's going to create our Skydome light in the background to light our model. And I'm going to change the intensity to 0.5. And I'm then going to go to color. So select the little checkerboard next to color. Then select the file. Then select the folder. And then let's load our HDRI that we just downloaded. So downloads, HDRI, open. And now we've got our HDRI in the background. Very cool. So now we need to create a Arnold texture for this. So I'm going to go and right click here. And in fact, let's go up to the hyper shader. Okay, so we've got our hyper shade open. And I'm going to create a new material. So right click, assign new material, then select the shader and the Arnold standard surface. So we can see this now. loaded within the hypershade. We've got our AI standard surface, and then we've got some settings here where we can add our displacement. So select the AI standard surface, and we're not going to do it from here, we're going to do it from the hypershade instead. And I'm going to change some of these settings. So the weight I'm going to set to 0.5. I'm going to set the weight for the specular to 0.5, and I'm also going to set the let's set the roughness to 0.5 as well. Okay, so the first thing we're going to include is the texture. So let's add that in. So let's go to color, so base color. Select the checkerboard, select file, and we're going to load the image name. We're going to load the texture that we made in 3DCoat. So let's go down to our head sculpt, textures, and then import our base TIFF material. Okay, and if we want to see this, we can select this little icon here, textured, and now we've got our textured model. Very cool. And now let's create our displacement. So the easiest way to create the displacement, and I'm just going to drag this down here so we can see this a bit better, is to drag and drop the displacement into the hypershader. So I'm just going to load my file again, so textures, head sculpts, textures. I'm going to drag and drop this displacement into the hypershade. So that's created the texture and the displacement. And I need to have something in between here that says, right, I need the displacement to hook up to the AI standard surface. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to create node, and I'm going to type in displacement. We've got displacement here. We don't need this version because we've already got it here, so I'm just going to select this and delete it. And we then need to hook up the alpha to the displacement, and then the displacement to the displacement shader. Now none of this is going to work until we select our model. We can then make sure it is selected, so we've got the head subdivide 3 version selected. Go down to Arnold, scroll down to subdivision, and the type should be set to Cat Clark. Iterations can be set to 3, and the displacement attribute will need to change this number. So the displacement is going to be very high at this stage, so we may need to drop this down to something like 0.5 or 0.1, but we shall see how that looks. So let's just close that down, and let's close this one, and then we can add a light. So let's go to Arnold Lights, and let's select an area light, and that's right down the bottom now. And let's move this up, and let's scale this up as well, make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to move this up to round about here, and then make sure that this arrow is actually pointing at our head. There we go. And then let's zoom in and go to Arnold and open Arnold Renderer. If you're not set to Arnold, then you can select the little clapperboard with the cog here and make sure it is actually set to Arnold. You can also change some of these settings. If you're going to export this out as a JPEG, you can set this to JPEG, and we can also change the image size. So let's do a HD 1080p, and then we can go ahead and close this down and go back to Arnold, open Arnold Render View, and then press play. So I'm just going to shrink this down just so we can see this a little bit better. Okay, so as you can see, the displacement was the displacement height was quite large, and there's also another setting that we need to change. So let's just select our model. It currently looks like it's been stung by a bee. So let's go to our Arnold standard surface, And let's just make sure we've got everything selected correctly. I'm also going to go back into my hypershade. Okay, so there's a few settings that we need to change here. We need to go back to our displacement map and double click on the displacement shader and scroll down until you get to the UV tiling mode, and it's currently set to off. We need to set this to Zbrush, and we can generate a preview. I've got this set to medium quality. The color space is currently at sRGB. We need to set this to raw, so it's reading the raw data from the displacement image. And this one is super important, otherwise it won't work and it's going to forever look like it's a swollen, stung by a bee man. Make sure it's set to alpha is luminance, okay, and that's going to add our displacement correctly. We also need to then change the displacement setting. So remember I said it was set to 1. It's still going to look very swollen, so we can then close this down. If I do a render, you'll now see that the displacement will be on the head, but it's still going to be kind of swollen. So let's have a look. Mesh not exported has 0 shading groups. Don't know what that's about. Let's just stop and render this again. There we go. So as you can see, it's starting to add the displacement, but it's still kind of swollen. So let's just select our head sculpt again, and I'm going to stop this render, and let's change our settings. So make sure you go to the base group to shape, go back down to the Arnold tab, scroll all the way down to subdivisions, make sure it is on Cat Clark, it is on iterations 3. We just need to change this height. So let's try 0.4 and see what this looks like, and then press play. So it might take a while for it to render, but we'll see a big difference soon. There we go, much better. So it's still it's still quite high, so let's go down to about 0.2 and let's test that one. And I'm just going to stop this, and before I press play again, let's just zoom this out. I'm going to go back to my light and let's increase the exposure. So the exposure is currently set to 0, that's why we can't see that light. Let's just try 5 for now, and then let's press play again. We should start to see some light in the scene. Might be a little bit too powerful, might need to drop it down. Or increase it actually. Let's have a look. So I'm just going to zoom in. Can we see the details on the face? It looks like they're starting to come through. Yeah, there we go. You can see the wrinkles on the face. I'm just going to increase this to about 13. Let's see what this does. There we go. Now we've lit the scene. Fantastic. So now you can see there's a whole lot more detail to this face just by adding the displacement. It looks very flat if you just add the texture. By adding the displacement, it's going to make all those skin details pop. It's going to make it look a lot more realistic. So that's already looking pretty darn cool. So I'm just going to select my model again. So let's right click and go to object mode and click my model. It's going to be quite slow with this render, so I'm just going to stop that there. Let's just admire how cool that looks on the side. Okay, and let's go back to our Arnold standard surface, and we can play around with the roughness. If you want to have a live view, then you can press stop here or just close that down. You can then go to renderer, and then instead of selecting the viewport, you can select Arnold and then press play. And this is going to be quite slow, but you are going to see your render view within your viewports. So here I could increase my roughness or decrease the roughness if I want to add a little bit of specularity to the skin. So let's see what that looks like. I'm just going to deselect here. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. We're just starting to see a little bit of specularity to the skin. Looks a little bit oily, a little bit wet. I might actually decrease this somewhat. The displacement is still quite high. So let's just drop it down just a little bit. So let's go back onto our hypershade. In fact, we won't need to do that. We'll close that down. I'm just going to stop that Arnold renderer because it's going to really slow down the computer. So let's close that down. I've also got Zbrush and Photoshop open, so it's going to be quite slow. Let's just stop it. And let's select our model. Let's go back down here and let's try 0.150. And then let's try that. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit better. Yeah, that's better. If you're seeing a lot of marks and you're seeing areas where you're seeing lines where they shouldn't be, then ideally you'll need to go back into 3DCoat and then paint them out. We can kind of see on the lips here, that smile from the original paintwork is kind of coming through there. So we might need to go back into that and then paint it out. You can also put that texture back into Photoshop and then you can paint it out that way. But ideally it's best to paint it on the model because you're going to get a good representation as to what it's going to look like. But as you can see, it's already looking pretty darn cool. Okay, so that's how we can go from Zbrush to 3DCoat to texture it and then into Maya. If you wanted to do the eyes, you can just use a simple sphere and then place it where the eye sockets are, and then you can place a texture. So you can place an eyeball texture, which I believe I haven't got within this folder, but you can easily do that. For now, I'm just going to add a cylinder and just make it white and then just add it in Photoshop instead, just to make this a little bit quicker. I'm just going to stop this render for now. And let's move this up. We certainly don't want them poking outside of the skin, so let's just stretch this out a little bit. There we go. And then let's duplicate that to the other side. Then I'll just add a simple Arnold surface. So add a new material, Arnold AI standard surface. Let's just keep these white. I could decrease the roughness slightly. And let's just name this I. And then I'm going to assign existing material and then add the eye to that one. Okay, so we've got a little bit of specularity. If you want to experiment with this, I don't know what your character's going to look like, but you could use the color and maybe add a different color for the eyes. So like a demon eye. I'm just going to keep these white for now. You could also increase metalness. Yeah, so maybe you want these metal eyes. I quite like that, so I might just keep it that way and then edit it in Photoshop. So let's just deselect here. It almost looks like he's blind. I quite like that. Right, so that is how we render it. Now we can just press stop on our render view. Let's close this down. We'll go to Arnold, open Arnold render view, and then just go ahead and click play. If you want a super detailed version, you can select the clapperboard and you can increase the settings here. So it's set to 1080p, which is perfectly fine, especially for a concept. If you want to increase it to 2K, 4K, and you want to go take a coffee break and have your lunch and come back in half an hour or so, then you can do so. You can also go to Arnold Renderer and you can increase all of these. So the diffuse, just increase and double all of these. I'd recommend you keep the camera at around 4, otherwise it's going to take an awful long time to render. But yeah, the diffuse can double up to 4 on all of them. For now, I'm just going to keep them at 2 just to make this a little bit quicker. Of course, I've got the advantage of pausing this video so you don't see the painfully long rendering times. Okay, so I'm going to press play here, and then I can get my camera angle. I'm going to select a slightly... in fact, how did I do the original one? Let's just have a look. Let's see. I think his head was just slightly up. Yeah, here's another example. This is where you could then put the texture back into 3DCoat, and I've just painted this in here. I've then added a light, so I've added a mesh light to the eyes just to make those eyes glow, and then I just added some spheres and made the material metal. Okay, so you can very quickly come up with these concepts. I've also added those lights, so that point light, I just changed the color to purple, added 2 of them, and then lit the scene this way. For now, I'm just going to let the scene be lit by the HDRI in the background, and also by that point light. Yeah, so the head was just slightly up. I think I'll keep it the same. Something like that, and zoom out. And if you don't want to see the HDRI in the background, you can select the Skydome light, and then you can go all the way down to camera and then just turn this to 0. And that's going to remove the background, but it's still going to light your scene, which is quite cool. You can also change the camera view. In fact, let's just stop this and close this down. It's currently set to its default camera, but if you go to Panels, Perspective, and New, then that's going to create a new camera. And then you can also experiment with some of these settings. So the focal length is set to 35. You usually shoot portraits with a 50mm lens. You can do 24 if you want a slight distortion to the face, but I'm going to set this to 50mm. That's a standard for a film camera. And the angle of view at 36, that's going to be okay. Let's just keep that the same. And then let's use this camera as our render. So let's go back to Arnold, open Arnold render view. We can see here, in fact, yeah, that's all the same. That's fine. That should now render with our new camera. We can see perspective shape and then perspective shape 1. That should then render. There we go. There's our new camera. Okay, and there we go. So we're going to jump into Photoshop after this. I'm just going to pause this, let this render, and then I'm going to save it out. Once this has stopped rendering, make sure you zoom in and just make sure that all of these little dots are disappearing and that it has actually fully rendered. Go to File, Save Image. And because we set that to JPEG within the clapperboard setting there, we can then save that out. So just select where you want to save it, name it, save it, and then we'll jump into Photoshop. So I will see you over in Adobe Photoshop. Okay, so now that we've rendered this out, make sure you have saved your work within Maya. And I've done my render, I've put this into Adobe Photoshop, and I need to just start editing into this render. Now I've noticed that there are some little marks here that ideally would have needed to be painted out in 3DCoat, but let's just paint them out now. So I'm going to select the Spot Healing Brush tool and just paint here just to remove it. There was also a slight line on the lips, so I'm going to remove that, and just underneath there, and that should do it. I don't like that section of the eyebrow in between there, so I'm going to remove that. And for now that's looking okay. So let's start adding some features onto this head sculpt. I've just got some images here and I'm going to experiment to see what these look like. So here I might just want to add a slight stubble, or I might want to add a beard, or I'm looking at different hairstyles, different beards, and even just some different eyes that I could add to the scene. So let's copy and paste this and just see what these eyes look like. So I'm just going to copy this. Control C, Control V. I'm going to copy this eye as well. Control C, Control V. And I'm also going to copy these eyebrows. Okay, let's copy that in. That looks strange, doesn't it? So let's just move the eyebrows up here. Let's move them up. Let's make them a little bit bigger. Now obviously I'm not going to leave them like this, I'm going to have to edit into them, but for now let's just move them into place. And then let's move the eye here and here. Right, so I'm going to double click on the layer and I'm going to use the underlying layer blend div just to try and blend this in. Then I'm holding Alt just to split this and blend it in even more. So once that's blended, I can just move this into place. That looks pretty good there, and then just use the eraser and erase everything else. Okay, not bad. And then we'll do the same for the other eye. So blend div, hold Alt, and then split it. That highlight on the eye almost makes it look reptilian. Why not? Let's just use the eraser tool again just to erase underneath and on top there. Okay, I mean we could edit it out later. I don't know if I like this highlight. I might just remove it and paint a different highlight in, but for now we'll keep it like that. I'm just going to double click on my eyebrows and just remove the lighter sections of the image and just blend that in a little bit more. We can always go to Image, Adjustments and Curves and just bring this down a little bit if you need to make it a little bit darker. Okay, and then Control T again to move this in place. And then we can go to Image, Adjustments and Color Balance if we need to just match it with our color of our head. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And let's do the same for this one. So I'm removing all of the light sections of the image. There we go, that's blending in more now. I can use the eraser if I've got any hard edges, which I can kind of see here. Let's remove that. Let's remove this one, and let's remove this. And again, Image, Adjustments, Color Balance, and then let's just create a little bit more of a warmer tone. Okay, that looks good. So, what else? I can kind of see, actually, I think these eyebrows are in the wrong place. Let's just move this one down a little bit. Press Control T. That looks better. Okay, so let's experiment with the others. I'm just going to hold Shift click all of these and then press Control G just to group these. I'm going to call this eyes and brows. And do we need to add anything else from this image? I don't think so. I don't really like his beard. No offense. Let's just delete that and let's go back into our reference and let's just try a stubble instead of a beard. So let's copy this. And let's bring this down. Whoops, I accidentally rotated that. Make this smaller. And I'm going to make sure that's on top of my folder. And then cut this. Duplicate this. I'm just going to drag this down to the duplicate or the new layer tab. Press Ctrl T. Right click. Flip horizontal. And now let's join them. Okay, we might need to edit that slightly. Then right click, merge down. And then let's try and match the same size as our head underneath. You can always drop the opacity down so we can see both what's on top and underneath. And let's drag this down. Try and get the same size. Whoops. Okay, and then let's go to opacity 100, and then let's try that blend if again. Let's just remove all of the lighter sections of that image. It's not perfect. Let's see if I can at least delete the background. So here I'm just using the lasso tool just to delete around that. And I might just do an adjustment actually. Let's do an image adjustments and curves, and let's just try and make it a little bit darker and then the whiter sections a little bit brighter. And then let's remove the lighter sections. So here I've just set it to a soft light. Let's see if I can change the curves. Just try and get it to match the exact same color as our head sculpt. I think that's probably as good as it gets. And then I can click OK and then use the eraser and then just erase the edge. Then go to image adjustments and color balance. And let's just do a slight color correction here. I think it's a little bit cooler. There we go. And then this line that's running through here, again I can use that spot healing brush tool just to remove that. Just so it looks like the hair is running down onto his neck and he hasn't got a double chin. Let's just erase that. Okay. Right, so let's just keep that there. I'm going to use the lasso tool just to bring this part of this beard back. There we go. Right, what else can we add? Let's just have a look. What would a big beard look like? Let's just drop this on. You can experiment with hair as well, so you could lasso around this and see what this looks like. I'm going to leave this character bold, but you can always experiment with it. Yeah, so you can just cut this out, put it on, and hey presto, we've got hair. Yeah, so you can do that as example. I'm going to leave it bold. The face, or should I say the eyes, look quite bright, so I may need to lower them. If you wanted to add any kind of scars, then we could do something similar. So let's have a look. Yeah, so we could actually paint them in ourselves. Okay, select a brush and then paint these in. This is actually a scar brush, funnily enough. So let's say we add some scratches here. What else have we got? Cut. Let's try that. They all look a little bit generic to me, to be honest, but let's just try doing a new layer and then making it a little bit darker and then paint the same thing on top. Then double click and blend this in a little bit more. Okay, so just an example there. You can paint whatever you want in there. You could add more photos, or you could continue to paint into it. So it could be some sort of war paint that you paint on. Yeah, totally up to you. Oh, you could add tattoos on the face. Depends what your character, or what you want your character to look like. So the last thing I'm going to do, actually I'm just going to experiment with this beard. I don't think it's going to look any good, but let's try it anyway. Let's just cut around here. Control C, Control V. And then same thing, blend if. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Let's just use the lasso tool and delete this bottom section. Let's see if we can get this moustache in here. Now it's fairly light, so let's just see if we can change this slightly. Let's use a color balance, or let's try a curve. And we might need to use something like a selective color, where we color lookup, selective color, and let's just change the reds here slightly. Let's make them a little bit more brown. That's a bit better, and then double click, and then let's see if we can remove it. Okay, we can then do another color balance just to try and make this a little bit darker. Okay, and I might just do another selective color. I'm going to keep those reds selected and just try and dull those reds a little bit. Okay. We can then press Control, Alt, Shift and E just to flatten this, and I'm going to use the crop tool just to bring this in a little bit closer. And I'm going to duplicate this and then do a filter, blur and Gaussian blur. And then I'm going to use the eraser, set to a soft brush, and then just focus in on the center of the face. Okay, we can then do an image, and let's do a curve and bring this down. Okay, so this controls the brightness. I can then press on my brush, go to a soft brush, so soft round basic, and then just bring some of this light back with black selected. And let's try something else. Let's duplicate all this again, Control, Alt, Shift and E, and this time let's go to brightness, so image adjustments and brightness, and let's bring this all the way up, something like that, and then go to image, and let's flick through these. I think lighting would be okay, and this is optional. I don't know whether this is going to work, but I'm going to select my mask and I'm going to mask over the entire thing, which is going to remove it, and then select white and just bring back some of those lighter areas. So in this case, just on the top of the head here, I might make it a little bit brighter. Maybe let's have some light kind of bouncing up onto his neck here. And then we can create a new layer. So here I've just added a little bit of rim lighting there. I can select a new layer. Let's select a white or a light grey. Just make it look like there's a little kind of point light just above him. Yeah, and you can continue painting into this. If you want to paint a little bit more of a rim light, then you can add that. As I mentioned earlier, I don't really like these eyes, so I think I'm just going to paint these out. Just make them a little bit darker as well, because they were quite bright. And now let's add our own little reflection in the eyes. So a little bit of specularity there. Okay. And that is about it. You can press Control, Alt, Shift, and E again. You can go to Filter, Sharpen, and Smart Sharpen. Yeah, if you want to sharpen some of these details, then click OK. We can also blend some of this in a little bit more. If you've done a lot of paint work, you can go to Filter, Noise, and Add Noise. You can just add a slight noise to it. There we go. And you can also, I'm just going to duplicate this again, go to Filter, Lens Correction, Custom, and then Increase Red. And I'm just going to zoom in here so we can see this effect. Let's do 200. So Increase Red, and then go to Magenta, and then also to Blue. Okay, we can see just on the outside edge here, we've got a slight distortion. That's going to make it look like it was taken with a DSLR, it's taken with a camera. Okay, and if you don't want that distortion everywhere on the scene, you can just go ahead and erase it. So I'm just going to go back to that sharpen and just remove the sharpen on the beard, make it a little bit softer. And again, you can continue painting into it and add more detail, or of course, find a good reference. So let's just paint into this just a little bit more and then we'll call it a day. So I'm going to use that chalk brush, select this color and then paint into it. Okay, so there's our final concept. So that's gone from Zbrush, the standard sculpt. We've then sculpted into it. We've then put that into 3DCoat, where we've textured it. We've added a displacement map with our texture. We've then put it into Maya. We've imported our texture and displacement map. We've lit it and rendered it. And now we've put it into Photoshop and we painted into it, and we've now got our concept, and it looks pretty cool, right? So instead of using a bunch of photos to create your concept, why not use 3D? You can always then change your camera angle, you can paint into your texture, and there's your character, and it looks very nice. So I hope that helped. I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing your results. Okay, take care, goodbye.